On this episode of I Hate It Here, and Georgia sucks ass, and Republicans suck, and cheaters gonna cheat, and if you don't have good policy, just restrict the votes. We have to talk about Georgia's new voting bill that just passed through. Let's start off with the fact that it was passed in one day. It went to the House, the state legislature, and and was signed by Governor Kemp all within a day. A freaking day. It has very, very small approval. 77% of people in Georgia disagree with this law, and it was still forced through because it is terrible. It is absolutely terrible. In another video, I discussed how it disenfranchises Black voters, and we're going to go over that very quickly, and then we're going to get into the parts that absolutely terrify me. But let's start off with, it's basically a new Jim Crow, a way to suppress Black and young voters, but very specifically Black voters. It wants to limit, if not completely restrict, weekend voting, which is predominantly, like, get rid of Sunday voting, which is predominantly when Black churches would do a thing called Souls to the Polls, where on Sundays they would go to church and then they would go vote. That is where you get a lot of your Black voters, especially your older Black voters. They would commute with other people. It was a way for those who didn't drive or didn't have the money for cars or to go to the polls. They would go to church and then they would go to the polls. It also takes back early voting and puts it from 7 p.m. to 5 p.m. That way people who work have a harder access to get to the polls during early voting because, of course, they get off at around 5, they can't make it to the polls, they can't vote. And you and I both know that Georgia has a history of 7 to 10 hour long lines for just to vote. Just to freaking vote in Georgia, you can have to wait up to 7 to 10 hours. And it is now illegal to hand out food and water for those people standing in those lines for 7 to 10 hours. So if you don't have water, someone cannot give you water because, you know, not being obnoxiously cruel would be not Republican. 77% of people in Georgia don't approve of this bill, yet they're still pushing it through. But that's not even the most alarming parts of this bill. While that is absolutely terrible, and there is a video, I will link it down below, that goes through all of it. I literally read it off. I want to talk about the fact that they took the ability to certify the elections away from the Secretary of State in Georgia, who refused to overturn the election for Donald Trump, and puts it in the hands of a group that the legislature would appoint. And I want to remind you that when Donald Trump was trying to fraudulently overturn an election and say he won when he did not win, Republican legislators in Georgia were going to go for it and tried to pressure the Attorney General of the state to do that. And they now want the power to appoint their own people so that if something like this comes up again, they can just put pressure on that person and or fire them to get them to do what they want, meaning that they can overturn a state's election. They also gave themselves the power to take over local election boards if they don't like what they're seeing. And you and I both know that they would target, you know, Atlanta and Fulton County, places where it is predominantly Black voters, and they would take over and just refuse to certify that so that those votes don't count. This is one of the most terrifying bills coming out of a state legislature that I've seen in my lifetime. This bill is anti-democratic. It is anti-American. It is anti-Black. It specifically targets Black voters who voted 80% for Biden and 90% for Ossoff and Warnock. Because instead of having decent policies and changing the way you look at things and not being racist pieces of garbage, no, they're just going to bring back Jim Crow style laws to stop people from voting. Like, they're specifically targeting black voters. They also have a drop where they're taking away drop boxes where they have to be, you can only have drop boxes at the polls, and they can only be, they have to be guarded. And there's no way that that's actually like a possibility while they're open to drop things. They have to be guarded. There's already not enough money for elections in Georgia. And everyone that I've spoken to in Georgia says that this is astronomically stupid and it's going to hurt and it will disproportionately affect black and young voters who have to go to work and they won't be able to drop off their early or they won't be able to drop off their ballots. They want to restrict the ability to, do mail-in ballots. They are not fraudulent. They're not. We've been doing freaking mail-in ballots since the Civil War. But this law is out there to harm the black community. It is out there to take away the democratic process. It terrifies me. And not a lot of things terrify me. And this isn't even my state, but I know that other states will follow suit. And can you imagine if a Democratic-held state, like my state is a Democratic, has Democratic legislator in control, and a Democratic congressman, could you imagine if they created a law that said that they could go into Republican strongholds and just refuse to certify? Can you imagine how loudly they would be screaming? This is awful. This is trying to ensure that black people do not vote, that young people do not vote, that only Republican strongholds get a say. This is a sign that the Republican Party is dying and they are willing to use fascism to maintain power. And anyone who doesn't see that is either a fascist or stupid. But this is not something Republicans should be supporting. And again, 77% of Georgia doesn't support this. So if 77% of Georgia doesn't support this, there's got to be some Republicans in there. It should terrify you. And for the Republicans who think this is a good thing that will ensure that you win, just remember that you will not always be in power. And there are Democratic stronghold states that could do the exact same thing to you. And that's not something you should want or be encouraging. This is not a good thing. This is an attack on our democracy. It is a blueprint for other Republican swing states to attempt to do this, to ensure that they can win when they don't have the popular vote, when the majority of Americans don't agree with them. This is my minority rule through suppression. I'm hoping that it will be overturned in the court systems. There are several lawyers, including the guy from Democracy Docket. If you don't know what that is, Google it, because he's one of the people that fought Donald Trump during the many election fraud bogus cases, and he did an excellent job, and he posted all the cases on there. In fact, that's actually where I get a ton of information from on that, because they supply all the court documents. So I'm sure they'll supply the court documents for this, and we'll have to keep up with it. But they are filing suit. I do think telling the legislature that they can basically overturn an election that they don't agree with will not hold up in the Constitution or with the Supreme Court. But it is a fairly conservative Supreme Court, so I'm a little nervous because the original framers of the Constitution didn't really want black people to vote anyway. They considered them 3/4 of people, so I'm a little nervous. Considering they're originalists, I'm hoping they're not gross, gritty, racist. So far, they've been an okay Supreme Court, but we will see. I am very, very, very nervous. Like, it could be an issue, but we will see. So let's hope that it gets overturned in the courts. Let's hope that Republicans don't use this as a blueprint in other states, because they're already starting to try and pull this crap in other states. It's an assault on democracy. We are seeing fascism breeding in our country, and we're seeing Republicans support it, because instead of having decent policies, instead of being decent people, they would rather just suppress anyone's vote who doesn't agree with them, especially if they are of people of color. They don't want them to vote, and this is just fucking wrong. Like, everything in my stomach is just turning and cringing at the idea that they can just go in and take over on the local election board, that they can appoint a board to certify, and if they don't like them, they can fire them. The obnoxious voter laws that they put in place, like not being able to give people water, getting rid of souls to the polls, getting rid of mail-in voting. I will link the video with the voter suppression stuff down below. You should go watch it. And I will see you later.